in, that was made out of laminated wood. It was 9 inches of laminated wood. And what we found was that in 2 of the buildings, the lam beam had been compromised and the structure was literally ready to fall down. And it was because of this. If you see these white mycelial mats, that's a serious problem. This is dry rot. And here's that. This is at that structure. This is the outside, and you can see the rot. This is the rot that occurred. Importantly, the reason why that rot set in was because a mold company went in and they used sealant. At a couple of years before we got there, they'd found mold inside the wall cavities. A mold company went in, they sprayed fungicide, and they sealed the wood. In so doing, they ruined what's called the hygric buffering capacity of the structure. Because the mold company sealed the wood, rot set in, because now the wood can no longer breathe. It traps the moisture.
So mold does not precede dry rot. They are 2 very different situations.
Completely different. You could have a house.
The fact that you have mold does not mean the next step is you're going to have dry rot.
Correct. In fact, you could have a perfectly dry house and dry rot can set in. That's why they call it dry rot, because you don't have to have a moisture problem, because it starts in the ground and now it migrates until it finds a food source and it starts pumping water into that food source. And that's what happened here. In this case, the water is coming from top to bottom. And this whole beam here is compromised. But it was able to stay there because a mold remediation company went in and painted all of this crap on here. And that sealed the wood, and that reduced the hygric buffering capacity, which is the volume of water a structure can hold before it becomes a water problem.
So if you're in a house and the inspection report comes back, if there was mold remediation done in the crawl space and you're looking up at white paint, you could have a big problem.
Serious problem. In fact, on that photograph I just showed you, the guy who told those people that their ears were going to bleed, etc., without authorization, they went and they sprayed 3 buildings with that. And we said, okay, guess what, guys? Get your wire brushes out, because on your nickel, you're going to go back and you are going to scrape off every square inch of that stuff that you just sprayed on all those buildings. And it cost them thousands of dollars to get it off. Because we said, you're not going any further on this project until you take off every inch of all that stuff you just sprayed on those buildings.
And it's different colors, right? It's
Pink, white, green. Yeah, it's so that when they're spraying it, so that they can see where they have sprayed. EPA says, do not do that. There's nobody that'll... The only people that are doing that is mold remediation companies, and we have seen 3 buildings go through catastrophic structural failure because they sprayed that stuff on there.
So it's
Because what happens, I didn't want to get into this, but here's what it is. Every structure has what's called a hygric buffering capacity. For about a 1,500 square foot single ranch house that's made out of say plaster and lath built in the 1920s, you can squirrel away about 300 to 500 gallons of water into that structure before you have what's called available water. Meaning now you've exceeded that amount. Now you put one more drop in there, a drop's got to come out somewhere. That's the hygric buffering capacity. Take that same 1,500 square foot ranch property and now build it out of wood 2x4 wood studs. And OSB, you've dropped it down to about 150 gallons of water. That same structure now built with TGI joists, with aluminum joists and aluminum wall studs, you're down to about 75 gallons of water. Okay, now if I go back to my house at 150 gallons of water, 1,500 square foot ranch property that was built in the 80s by Hutchinson Homes, the 2x4, all structural timber, all right? Now, I have about 150 gallons I can work with. If I go in and crawl spaces are a great sink. We have to remember, crawl spaces breathe. Water goes into the soil as well as out from the soil. Just depends on that house. But if I go in and I spray a sealant in there, I have now stopped that wood from breathing. and we removed the photograph just yesterday. I wish now I'd left it in. They've stopped that wood from breathing, and now any moisture that goes into that structure will preferentially go into that wood that's behind the sealant. And S. lacrymans will find it, and it will rot that. And the property that I was talking about was, it was a hotel in Beaver Creek. Somebody had fallen through the floor in one of the hotel rooms, and they'd fallen into the basement, from their hotel room into the basement. And we went down there to investigate it, and what had happened was a mold remediation company had gone into the crawl space. Now, why you would ever remediate mold in a crawl space anyway, I don't know, because, and what they did then was they sprayed this white stuff called fiber lock all over the floor joists in the crawl space. And all it did was seal that moisture in there. S. lacrymans got in there. And you would look at the floors and you would go, they look fine, they look fantastic. They're nice, they're wood, they're whatever. But all you had to do is reach up and grab it, and you could take away chunks in your hand. Because now there was nothing behind the sealant. All the wood was rotten. The only thing that was holding everything together was the paint. And it was the paint that caused the problem. It was the sealant that caused the problem. Never, 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 never is there a time when you would use a sealant to seal wood. If sealing wood was a good idea, the construction guys would have done it when they built the house.
What about a vapor barrier?
Vapor barriers, good question. Crawl spaces are sinks or sources, either one. In other words, they will sequester moisture or they will give it up. In 1980, about mid-90s, the folks in Adams County contacted the American Industrial Hygiene Association, some of us, and they said, we are going to require vapor barriers in all structures, and we're going to require ventilation in all crawl spaces. What do you think? And we said, bad idea. Don't do that. Why? Because it affects the hydric buffering capacity, and you don't know which way you're going to be driving it. You're assuming all moisture is coming up. You're forgetting some moisture goes down. So what they did was they passed it anyway. They said, we were having too many mold problems, so we're going to do it. So they made that a building code issue. And they said, you have to put down vapor barriers. And then they put in active fans in the crawl space. Well, what they did was they created a laboratory experiment. Because now the moisture has no place to go. Imagine it's 95 degrees outside at 20% relative humidity. And now you've got a crawl space at, say, 65, and you're bringing that warm air in from the outside into that cool crawl space. What do you think is going to happen? It's going to rain in the crawl space. Yep, you're going to drop it below the dew point, and now you've got a bunch of moisture in there. So how did they fix the problem with all these houses that had mold in Adams County? They went in and they yanked out all of the vapor barriers, and they got rid of the active ventilation out of the crawl spaces because it was a bad idea. Bad idea. Sometimes a vapor barrier is a good idea. But you have to remember that you're taking an action to correct an identified problem. If you haven't identified the problem, you're not taking corrective action. So just arbitrarily saying this needs a vapor barrier. Yeah. Yeah, you don't. Vapor barriers can be good or bad.
They like to have you put them in when they put in a radon system.
Yeah, well, you sat through my radon class, so. This is an old folks facility. It's an old folks home. This was multiple housing. Certified mold inspector went in and he said, oh my God, you've got toxic mold. I'm a certified mold inspector. And
Certain places smell like old people.
yeah, I know. Actually, my daughter works at a assisted living place, and so she'll, for example, we will.
I can walk in and tell you how old.
She does the same thing. Yep. And he said, oh, this is toxic mold. You need to evacuate. They started to evacuate these folks out of this facility, and then we got called in, and we said it's not mold. It's called efflorescence. It's dissolved salts. It's just dissolved salts. And then sometimes being a smartass is not a good idea when you're in the field. So, because what I did was they said, well, how can you tell without testing? And I said, well, it's easy. I said, for example, I said, mold doesn't dissolve in water. I said, go get me a glass of warm water. And they did. And I gathered some of this efflorescence off the walls and everything. And I dumped it in there and I swirled it around. I said, look, it dissolves. Mold doesn't dissolve in water. And she goes, well, it's still harmful. I went, it's not harmful. It's like Epsom salt. It's like chalk. It's salt. And she said, well, why should I believe you? She said, I think it's harmful. And I went, And I drank it. That client never used this again. That builder went, this guy is nuts. And it tasted awful, but it's, I drank it to prove that.
Backing that up to get rid of it then?
The first one is in a laundry room. And we told them, we said, look, if it really bothers you, go and just go and vacuum it. But here's the deal is you're not going to get rid of it because 5 years from now it's going to come back again and again and again. And the reason it's going to keep coming back is because efflorescence is a result of water that moves through. Wow, I didn't know it could do that. Hold on a minute, let me see here. Let me get back to that slide. Well, it might be easier if I just...
My
Okay.
favorite client not only got super great on mitigation, but he had vapor put down and had all that sprayed.
Yeah.
He's going to have
Job security. It'll give me something to testify 10 years from now. So here's we got a concrete wall, and here's what happened. This is a rim joist up here. That's the rim joist, and the water is coming through. And as the water comes through, it dissolves salts in the concrete and through the soils. Now it reaches the apical side. It reaches that side, and now it starts to evaporate, and it can form beautiful crystals, just gorgeous crystals. All right, but it's just salt. So you can go and vacuum it off, but it's going to come back. It's just going to come back. It's not growing. It's just water intrusion that's coming through oftentimes at a rate that's too slow to see. So you'll have these beautiful crystals forming. You just brush them off, and they'll be back again in a couple of years. And you brush them off again. It's just part of building maintenance. This, like I said, this was an old folks' home that was evacuated. We've seen two facilities evacuated because of this. One was a medical facility in Cherry Creek. You think a bunch of doctors would have known? Yeah. No, they believe the toxic mold guy. Okay, so it was fast and furious. Michelle's going to have the presentation.
so much smarter.
Oh my goodness, that's so awesome.